This will be a quick video on the types of questions you can expect in an interview with Blue Origin, and I basically linked many of these questions with their leadership principles, which I highly encourage you to read if you're preparing an interview with them. Question number 1, tell me about the time when you were 75% through a project or program or initiative and had to pivot to ensure its successful completion. All right, so when you had a challenging delivery. Okay, so this is a pretty standard interview question, which talks about your ability to deliver results, being the leadership principle involved here. Right, so you focus on the right inputs to deliver. Right. Also, maybe useful to know that using the star format is something that many people, especially technical people, find super beneficial, because by templating this, you ensure you won't forget anything from what you plan to say. Hopefully, you prepare the story bank, because that's the best way to prepare these types of interviews. Okay, moving on. Describe a time when you had to get a project or initiative completed with limited resources, and how did you approach the solution? What was the impact? And knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently? Right, so this talks about your resourcefulness or frugality, if you want. Right, so when you had to work with limited resources. Now I must tell you that at least at Amazon, but also at Blue Origin, I'm sure being frugal is something that will likely be queried for more senior types of roles, where, you know, if the type of role you're applying for requires a certain level of frugality, then you can definitely expect questions such as the one I just mentioned, right? And again, the same story. This is a behavioral type of question, meaning the interviewer is interested in screening on your past experiences so they can predict your future performance on the job. Reason why I'm stressing this, that you're interested in your past experiences, because these questions can be framed quite counterintuitively, such as open-ended questions. So, for instance, instead of asking you to describe a time when you had to get a project completed with limited resources, they could simply ask you, how do you deal with limited resources? Right? And many candidates would give a generic type of answer, which could be a great start, you know, but the best way to qualify a candidate on a behavioral interview is using their past experience, their specific stories, also in the star format, and so on. Right? Question number 3 here. Tell me about the time when speed played a critical role in your work, and what was the outcome? Right? So how do you work how do you show your bias for action? Okay, to be straightforward with you, so this would be the leadership principle. These questions can be framed in many different formats, such as, you know, they can say when speed played a critical role, when in a stressful environment, if you want. Okay, so they can frame it in many ways, but ideally, the moment you hear speed, that's usually bias for action, right? So also worthwhile mentioning here, tell me about time when speed played a critical role in your work, and what was the outcome. So what was the outcome? I intentionally added this second half of the question because if you remember the star format, you should also talk about results. Okay, so another thing you might want to pay particular attention to when speed played a critical role in your work, you should talk about a success story, not about the time when you did a mistake. All right, so this would be something you really want to pay particular attention to, and don't shoot yourself in the leg with such mistakes. You know, like an interview is about your successes, except if they explicitly ask you for a failure story, right? So success stories in the star format and behavior questions in general, right? Next question, tell me about the time you took on something which was not in your area of responsibility, but definitely in your company's best interest. Okay, so when you took work that wasn't directly your thing, but you thought it would benefit. It could benefit your team, it could benefit the department, or it could benefit the whole company. Very much depending on what the type of role that you're applying for, right? For a director level role, it would very much make sense to say when you benefited the whole company. For a software engineer, maybe not that much. But anyway, long story short, the leadership principle in question here would be ownership. So this is a classic ownership type of question, right? Pretty straightforward to find answers once you know why the question gets asked, right? So building listening skills is also something which pays off big time in these types of behavioral interviews. So in other words, if you spot the principle from the question that's getting asked, that's when you score the best points with these interviews. Next one, tell me about the time when you had to make a decision between standards and delivery. What trade-offs did you make and what was the outcome? And knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently? Right, so this is quite a tricky one. The time when you had to make a decision between standards and delivery. And this actually talks about the leadership principle of operational excellence, which is something, it's a leadership principle, a core value, which is specific to Blue Origin. It wasn't imported from Amazon's 14 or 16 now leadership principles. And I believe this very much makes sense to more technical types of roles. I believe this is the core reason why they added this operational excellence as a leadership principle. And I believe it's a great exercise for you to prepare, right? A decision between standards and delivery. There's various ways you could go around this. You could even talk about frameworks, depending on the type of role you're applying to. But I'm sure that my idea here would be that the moment you link this with a keyword, with some framework, something specific to your role, you automatically sell yourself even better as a subject matter expert and a qualified candidate for this job. Right? Next question. Tell me about the time when you had to communicate a change in direction that you anticipated people would have concerns with. What did you do to understand the concerns and mitigate them? Were there any changes made along the way after hearing these concerns? And how did you handle questions and or resistance? Were you able to get people comfortable with the change? Okay, so notice here this question is quite long. Actually, these different sections of this question might be asked in the follow-up or in the challenge questions. I just asked it at once because I thought it was a great listening exercise. If you want, and especially to help you to maybe spot the principle more easily here. So the principle, the core value in question would be earn the trust of others. Okay, so a time you had to communicate a change in direction that you anticipated people would have concerns with. How do you get buy-in from stakeholders? How do you convince people of something? How do you earn their trust? Okay, so usually there are two aspects of this. Either you come up with data to convince them, either you use your interpersonal skills. Ideally a combination of both. But the degree to which you call upon your interpersonal skills varies with respect to the role that you're applying for. Right? So a software engineer would rather go to the data and try to find trying to use critical thinking to prove their point, when compared to an executive type of role would maybe use interpersonal skills a bit more extensively, if I may call it so. But long story short, earn the trust of others is a super important topic in job interviews, and I highly encourage you that you prepare questions of a time when you influenced an outcome. Okay, so what you the outcome that you're influencing should be your subject matter expertise, right? So a developer won't talk about a time when they influence the profit of the company, except if a very small business, but you would rather talk about you influenced a decision making on how to deliver on a feature with much better outcome, rather than the responsibilities of another type of role, right? Such as a salesperson, for example. Okay, so this was on earn trust. Next one. Tell me about the time when you helped one of your team members develop their career, and how did you help that team member? What was the result? Okay, so again, this question speaks to a principle that is not very commonly asked for junior types of roles, and maybe individual contributor roles in particular, it's hire and develop the best. Okay, so if it makes sense in your role to help and to coach team members and help them develop their career, then yes, these types of questions might get asked, but it's not, at least at Amazon, they don't ask it for all roles, right? So this is something you should keep in mind. Still, I believe it's a very valid interview question. How do you help people advance their career, right? You must have had occasions when you coached some junior members of your team. Right. Next question. Describe a time when you refused to compromise your standards around quality or customer service, or etc. What was your customer, or I should say, who was your customer, and what was the result? Okay. So a time when you refused to compromise your standards around quality or customer service. Okay. So this would be on the, even though it's about the customer. This should be on insist on the highest standards. Okay, so a time when you refuse to compromise your standards. Now, if I may just add, around quality, standards around quality would make sense for pretty much anyone, but standards towards customer service would basically speak to roles which have direct customer interaction, right? Or one could argue that, hey, even technical roles have internal customers, and so on. But still, I must emphasize that this question is not necessarily on customer obsession, but rather on insist on the highest standards. And I believe this is key to understand in order to give the best possible type of answer. Right? Next one, give me an example of a complex problem which is solved with a simple solution. What made the problem complex, and how do you know your solution addressed the problem? Right? So complex problem with a simple solution. So this would be on the leadership principle of technical ambition and simplicity. Okay, so technical ambition, of course, as the name implies, is geared towards technical roles in particular. But usually the way the question is framed, it gets many people stuck. A complex problem with a simple solution. In my experience, you could maybe neglect a little bit the part with a simple solution and focus on when you solve the most complex problem that you ever solved. And I'm sure there was some simplicity involved in there. The more you'll think about it, the better, the more likely you'll find the simple part that was key to solving that. It doesn't have to be the whole thing was very simple. It's just a part of it could have been simple. But the main thing here is that the complex problem must speak to your technical ambition. Okay, so this is key here, right? Next question. Tell me about the time when you strongly disagreed with your manager or peer on something you considered critically important for the business. What was it, and how did you handle it? Knowing what you know now, how would you do anything differently? Okay, so a time when you strongly disagreed with someone on something. These are the types of questions who get people stuck because, or I should say, who get people disqualified in job interviews. Exceptionally talented technical individuals who really put the blame on others, I should say. Or the other extreme would be when people agree with everything an interviewer says, just for the sake of social cohesion, the backbone test, if you want. But a time when you strongly disagree with your manager, it doesn't have to be a time when you were necessarily right. It could have been also a time when you were wrong and you disagree with your manager, but even though you committed to the decision they had, and eventually it was a good idea, right? This could also as well play for a good story in this case. So the leadership principle would be have backbone, disagree, and commit. Okay, and there's a famous test in Amazon interviews, the backbone test. In other words, they would challenge your reasoning to see on whether you're the type of who can easily agree for the sake of social cohesion and just to make a good impression in a job interview. Okay, so a time when you strongly disagree with your manager, think of an example where, it was, of course, genuine, but more importantly, there was a strong disagreement and either you were right, either you were wrong, but you must really address the leadership principle. Have backbone, disagree, but commit, right? Committing would be when your manager was right and you went with their decision and it was right? If you want to show disagreement when maybe they were wrong on something, and you came up with the data and you proved it, and you went your way for the purpose of a job interview. But again, the leadership principle would be have backbone, disagree, and commit. All right. And the last question I want to talk about here would be, tell me about the time when you established a vision for a team or product or initiative when there wasn't one. And how did you get buy-in and drive execution for that? What was the outcome, and would you have done anything differently if you had to do it all over again? Okay, so time when you established a vision for your team, product, or initiative. This specific question would go very well with manager level types of roles, but still I believe it makes sense also for some type of individual contributor roles, and I believe it speaks quite well to the first principle at Blue Origin, that is passion for our mission, okay, or think big if you want. So a time established a vision. Does your subject matter expertise imply having a strong vision in what you do? Because, for a software engineer, it's not the main thing, but someone who has to do some design work, I believe that having a vision is quite essential to these types of roles. And if I may just stress one more time, that these types of questions are best answered, especially for technical roles, in STAR format with, some relevant metrics, ideally. And you'd want to sell your subject matter expertise at all points in these interviews, even though, this is a behavioral part of an interview, but still you should be on the lookout for subsequent follow-up and challenge questions on your technical ability to deliver for the role that you're applying for. Okay, so even though Blue Origin and Amazon are really big in using behavioral interviews, I believe it's super important to understand that at the end of the day, they also hire you because of your subject matter expertise. And the best way to pass these interviews, if you want some professional advice, would be to prepare a story bank. And story bank with at least 2 or 3 stories for each of the leadership principles, which, of course, the extent that makes sense to your role. And the moment you'll start building the story bank, you will realize that what is the best way to improve your experience that you want to communicate in a job interview. And maybe one last thing here, role play is something that is hugely beneficial if you want to try things out and see how they work before the actual interview. Right, so I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.